My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 26 years old, and my story begins on the day of my grandparents' funeral. The church pews were filled with black coats and lowered heads, but my parents' eyes weren't on the casket. They were on me. I felt their stares burn as the attorney's folder landed on the table after the service, and with it came words that shattered every fragile bond left in our family. Claire is the sole heir. In that instant, I knew nothing would ever be the same. White right pointing backhand index before I share what happened next. Tell me where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The rain tapped against the stained glass windows as though the sky itself was mourning with us. I sat in the front row, clutching a folded handkerchief, my fingers trembling not only from grief but from the weight of being watched. My grandparents' portraits rested on the altar, smiling back at us in frames they had chosen long before their passing. They had been the kind of people who thought of everything, who prepared for even the moments they wouldn't be here to see. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. When the final hymn faded, people began shuffling toward the fellowship hall. The smell of brewed coffee and polished wood filled the air, but I barely tasted anything. I caught glimpses of cousins hugging, neighbors offering condolences, but behind me, my parents whispered in low, urgent tones. I could feel their eyes flicking toward me, then away, like I was both the subject and the threat in their conversation. The attorney, a gray-haired man named Mr. Wilkins, stood quietly in the corner with a leather folder tucked beneath his arm. I'd seen that folder once before, back when Grandma asked me to drive her into town. She had gone into his office while I waited in the car, and when she came out, she patted my hand and said, "Someday, Claire, this will matter." At the time, I didn't understand. Now, her words pressed against my memory with crushing clarity. As we gathered in a small meeting room attached to the church, the mood shifted from mourning to anticipation. The chairs creaked as relatives sat down, the air charged with a mix of grief, curiosity, and greed. My aunt fiddled with her necklace. My sister scrolled on her phone, pretending not to care. My father crossed his arms, jaw tight, while my mother's lips formed a thin line that looked more like restraint than sorrow. Mr. Wilkins placed the folder on the table, unfastened the clasp, and began to speak in a steady, practiced voice. Your grandparents were very deliberate in their decisions. They wanted this to be clear, so there would be no misunderstandings. He pulled out the first document, the crisp shuffle of paper echoing like thunder in the quiet room. My heart pounded as he read aloud. Little bequests for distant cousins. Donations to the church. Then he reached the final page and said the words that seemed to crack the air in two. The remainder of the estate, including all assets, property, and accounts, is to be given solely to their granddaughter, Claire Donovan. The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon we'd just heard. My aunt gasped softly. My sister's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. My mother's eyes narrowed, and my father leaned forward as though he hadn't heard correctly. "What?" he said, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the quiet. "Just Clay." Mr. Wilkins adjusted his glasses, his expression calm but unyielding. "Yes, solely Claire." It was in that instant I saw my parents' grief dissolve, replaced by something darker, something I'd never wanted to believe existed in them. My father's face reddened, his knuckles tightening around the edge of the table. My mother leaned closer, her words a whisper but loud enough for me to hear. "They've made a mistake." But deep down, I knew they hadn't. My grandparents had seen things others refused to notice. The quiet dinners I brought to them when they were too tired to cook, the weekends I spent repairing the old garden fence, the evenings I stayed just to keep them company. I had been there, and my sister hadn't. Still, knowing that didn't shield me from the sting of my parents' eyes. It wasn't pride or happiness they felt for me. It was betrayal, as if I had stolen something that was never mine to begin with. As the meeting ended, people filed out slowly, murmuring to one another. I lingered near the door, waiting for a moment to breathe, but my father's hand gripped my arm before I could step away. His voice was steady, but the fire beneath it was unmistakable. "This doesn't belong to you," he said. "You'll sign it over." My mother stood beside him, her hand resting on his sleeve as though to temper him, but her words were no softer. Claire, your sister needs it more than you. We all do. Don't be selfish. For a moment, the room spun. Selfish. That word had been a weapon in my family for as long as I could remember. If I wanted something for myself, I was selfish. If I said no, I was selfish. And now, even when I hadn't asked for any of this, they found a way to wield it again. I pulled my arm free, my voice barely steady. It wasn't my choice. My father's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching. Then make the right one now. The demand hung in the air like a curse. I turned away before the tears could spill, retreating into the hallway where the smell of old hymnals and polished wood pressed around me. My grandparents' portraits still rested near the altar, their smiles unchanged, their eyes frozen in a peace I no longer recognized. I whispered under my breath, as though speaking to them. Why me? Why now? The only answer was silence, broken by the distant sound of the church bell. That night, as I lay awake, I couldn't shake the image of my parents' faces. Not grieving, not mourning, but calculating. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was an obstacle. And though I didn't know it yet, the shadows of that funeral would follow me into every corner of what came next. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's jaw tightening, my mother's narrowed stare, and the heavy silence that filled the church hallway. By the time morning light crept through my bedroom curtains, I already knew the phone would ring. And it did, shrilly, impatiently, as if demanding an answer I wasn't ready to give. When I picked up, my mother's voice came through, clipped and deliberate. Claire, your father and I want to come by tonight. We need to talk. It wasn't really a question. I hesitated, the phone warm against my ear. About what? You know what? Her tone was sharp enough to slice through any pretense. Don't make this harder than it has to be. She hung up before I could respond. The rest of the day stretched like a tightrope. I paced my small apartment, straightening things that didn't need straightening. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than usual, marking each second closer to a confrontation I couldn't avoid. My grandmother's quilt lay draped across the couch, and I ran my fingers over the stitching, remembering her hands guiding mine years ago. Promises mean something, Claire, she had said once when I was little. Never give one you can't keep. By evening, when the knock finally came, my stomach was in knots. My parents walked in without waiting for an invitation. My father carried himself stiffly, like a man marching into battle, while my mother wore a mask of strained calm. They sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where we used to share Sunday dinners. The air was thick with everything unspoken. Claire, my father began, his voice measured but heavy. You need to understand what's at stake here. That estate, it's not just about money. It's about family, responsibility, legacy. I folded my arms across my chest, leaning against the counter instead of sitting down. And you think I don't understand that? You don't, he shot back, sharper now. You're young. You don't have the same obligations we do. That money could help keep this family afloat. Your sister's tuition, our mortgage, your mother's medical bills. My mother cut in, her tone softer but no less pressing. Claire, your grandparents meant well, but they didn't realize the pressure this would put on us. On you. We just want what's fair. Fair. The word twisted in my chest. Fair meant giving up what they had chosen for me. Fair meant pretending my late nights with Grandma, my weekends fixing Grandpa's garden fence, my countless hours spent being there, meant nothing. I'm not signing anything over, I said, my voice low but steady. My father leaned forward, his palms flat on the table. Claire, listen to me. Families survive because we make sacrifices. You have a chance to keep us together. Don't throw that away because of pride. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer. My mother's eyes glistened with what looked like tears, but I couldn't tell if they were real or rehearsed. Sweetheart, think of your sister, she whispered. She's struggling. She needs this more than you do. Don't you remember when you promised you'd always look out for her? Her words hit Nive. I did remember. Years ago, on the night of my sister's high school graduation, I'd stood with her in the backyard, fireworks bursting overhead, and promised I'd always protect her. At the time, it had felt like love. Now, it felt like a weapon being turned against me. I said I'd look out for her, I replied, my throat tight. I didn't promise to give away my life. Silence filled the kitchen. My father's eyes hardened, but my mother leaned back, pressing her hands together like she was praying. Claire, she said, please, if you walk away from this, you'll regret it. Families don't forget. Her words lingered long after they left. When the door finally closed behind them, I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. My phone buzzed with a new message, this time from my sister. Just 4 words. You owe me this. I stayed at the screen, my chest heavy. How quickly love had turned into a tally sheet. The next few days blurred into a storm of calls and knocks on my door. My parents came back twice more, each time armed with new arguments, new pressures. My aunt even phoned, claiming that my grandparents wouldn't have wanted this division. Everyone spoke of promises, as though I had broken them, as though my loyalty could be measured in dollar signs. One night, unable to stand the walls closing in, I drove to the old house. The garden was overgrown, weeds curling through the fence I'd once repaired. The porch light was out, but I sat on the steps anyway, listening to the quiet hum of crickets. For a moment, I imagined my grandparents sitting beside me, the hands folded gently in their laps. I don't know what to do, I whispered into the night. They think I'm selfish. They think I owe them. But if I give this up, it's like everything we shared never mattered. A breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of lilacs Grandma had planted years ago. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough to remind me that they had trusted me for a reason. When I got back home, another letter was waiting on my doorstep. No return address, just my name scrawled across the envelope. Inside, in my mother's handwriting, were 2 sentences. You're tearing this family apart. Don't make us do something we'll regret. My hands shook as I folded the paper back up. It wasn't just pressure anymore. It was a promise of consequences. And as much as it terrified me, I realized something important. They weren't going to stop. Not until I broke. The letter sat on the coffee table, folded neatly, almost polite in its cruelty. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It just sat there, staring back at me every time I walked into the living room. Those words, "Don't make us do something we'll regret," looped in my head like a broken record. I hadn't realized how shaky my hands had become until the mug I was holding slipped slightly, coffee spilling over the rim. My nerves were unraveling, thread by thread. I wanted to believe it was just desperation talking, but something in my gut told me otherwise. By the 3rd day after the letter arrived, there was another knock at my door. I froze, half expecting my parents' silhouettes on the other side. Instead, when I opened it, I found a man in a grey suit holding a thick folder. "Claire Thompson?" he asked. "Yes." He handed me the folder, his expression unreadable. "You've been saved." I stood there, the weight of the papers sinking into my hands before I even knew what was inside. My voice cracked. "Wait, what is this?" But the man was already walking away, his shoes clicking against the pavement, leaving me in the doorway with the bundle that felt heavier than bricks. I brought it inside, laid it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for what felt like hours. The folder seemed alive, daring me to open it, to face whatever fresh battle had been launched. Finally, I slid a finger under the tab and pulled the papers free. Legal documents. Dozens of them, neatly typed and stamped. My parents' names filled the first page. The words blurred slightly as I read. Petition for guardianship of estate on grounds of incapacity. I sat back in my chair, my heart thudding. They weren't just pressuring me anymore. They were going to court, to prove I was incapable of managing what my grandparents had left me. My mind raced. heat rising in my cheeks. Incapable. Was that really what they thought of me? Or wise? Was that the story they were willing to sell to strangers just to get their hands on something that wasn't theirs? I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to steady myself. My grandmother's voice echoed again in memory. Promises mean something, Claire. She had trusted me with this. Now my own parents were calling me unfit. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was my aunt again. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me wanted answers. Claire, she said before I could even greet her. I told them not to do this. I told them it would only make things worse. So you knew? My voice trembled. I heard them talking. They think you'll cave if it goes public. They said the papers would scare you enough to sign over control. I laughed bitterly, though it came out more like a gasp. So this was just another tactic. They're desperate, honey, she whispered. But don't let them corner you. You're stronger than they think. After hanging up, I sat at the table, the papers spread out like some kind of puzzle I never asked to solve. The legal language was cold, but the intention screamed through it. Strip me of authority, take control, erase the fact that my grandparents had chosen me. That night, I couldn't stay in my apartment. I packed a small bag and drove back to the old house again. It was the only place that felt like mine, like a shield against the storm. I walked through each room, flicking on lights one by one, until I ended up at the dining table where so many family meals had once been shared. I laid the papers down right there, in the same spot my grandparents had once set out Sunday dinner. The contrast was unbearable. Where laughter had once echoed, now silence pressed heavy. I ran my fingers along the wood, tracing the grooves Grandpa had carved fixing a loose leg years ago. I could almost hear him grumble about doing it right the first time. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I fell asleep at that table, my head resting beside the folder. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the curtains, hitting the papers like a spotlight. For the first time, I really looked at the signatures, the bold confidence of their names declaring war against me. I whispered aloud, "You're not going to win." The sound of my own voice startled me, but it felt good, strong, even. Later that morning, I called a lawyer. My voice shook when I explained what had happened, but she listened carefully, her tone steady and professional. "Claire," she said, "this is serious, but it's not impossible to fight. They'll need proof of incapacity. Do you have anything that shows you've been handling your life responsibly?" I glanced around the kitchen, the bills paid on time, the neatly stacked receipts, the quiet, steady order of my small but functional life. "Yes," I said firmly, "I do." As I gathered documents for her, I realized something. Every receipt, every bank statement, every piece of proof was like a counterweight against their claims. My parents had painted me as incapable, but my life itself told a different story. That afternoon, I drove the paperwork to her office, handing over my proof with a determination I hadn't felt before. When I got back to the house, the folder from my parents still sat on the dining table. I didn't throw it away. Not yet. I wanted it there, a reminder of what I was fighting against. Standing over it, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This table had seen birthdays, arguments, laughter, tears, and now it held the evidence of betrayal. But it was also where I was choosing to stand my ground. My parents thought these papers would break me, but as I stayed down at their signatures, something shifted inside me. They had underestimated me. The morning of the hearing arrived like a storm I couldn't outrun. My lawyer, Anna, had told me to be ready early, and I was. I had barely slept, but I dressed carefully, nothing flashy, just a navy dress that felt respectful, steady. My hands trembled as I pulled my hair back into a neat bun. I kept repeating to myself, "You belong here. You're not what they say you are." The courthouse smelled faintly of Polish and old paper. As we walked through the echoing halls, Anna leaned toward me and whispered, "Remember, today is about control. They'll try to rattle you, but your truth is stronger." When we entered the courtroom, my breath caught. My parents were already seated at the long wooden table, papers stacked neatly before them. My father's expression was stiff, his jaw set. My mother avoided my eyes, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The sight of them, so calm, so rehearsed, sent a cold chill down my spine. I sat opposite them, the weight of the room pressing down on me. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, entered and called the case. Petition for guardianship of estate on grounds of incapacity. The words hit like a hammer, even though I had read them before. Then the witnesses were called. I hadn't expected anyone beyond lawyers and family, but when the side door opened, my aunt stepped in. And behind her came two neighbors from my grandparents' street, Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, who had lived next door for decades. I hadn't seen them in years. My parents' eyes flickered with unease as the couple settled into the benches. The judge nodded toward my parents' lawyer first. He launched into a practice speech about financial responsibility, risk, and the unfortunate reality of youthful inexperience. His words painted me as naive, incapable of managing a fortune. Each sentence was designed to chip away at me. I sat there, hands folded, my heart racing. When my father took the stand, I braced myself. His voice was calm, almost kind. We're only thinking of Claire's future. $31 million is a burden for someone her age. We want to protect her from mistakes. Protect. The word stung. Protecting me had never looked like sneaking lawyers into my life behind my back. Then came my mother. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her voice soft, almost trembling. She's sweet, but she's not ready. We've watched her struggle. She doesn't always make the best decisions. I gripped the edge of the table, anger pulsing under my skin. Struggle? They meant the nights I worked 2 jobs in college to cover tuition, the years I lived frugally while they looked away. They had called that struggle weakness. Anna touched my arm gently. Steady, she whispered. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, my knees threatening to buckle. I looked at the judge first, then at the room. I loved my grandparents, I began, my voice quieter than I wanted. They trusted me. They left this to me, not to my parents, not to anyone else, because they knew I would honor their wishes. I took a breath, steadying the tremor in my throat. I pay my bills. I've worked. I've lived responsibly. What they are saying about me is not true. It's a story to take what isn't theirs. The judge studied me carefully. Do you have evidence of your financial responsibility? Yes, I said, nodding. Anna handed over the neatly organized file we'd prepared. Receipts, statements, proof of income. But it wasn't the paperwork that shifted the room. It was what came next. The judge called for witnesses. My aunt stood, her hands clasped tight. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. I've watched Claire manage her life for years. She has been nothing but responsible. My sister and her husband, she glanced at my parents, are not here out of concern. They are here out of greed. A ripple moved through the courtroom. My parents stiffened, but before they could react, Mr. Reynolds rose. His voice was gravelly, but strong. I knew Claire's grandparents longer than anyone. They told me, plain as day, why they left everything to her. They said she was the only one they trusted. They said her parents cared too much about appearances and money. Gasps filled the room. My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something close to relief. Mrs. Reynolds added softly, we saw her care for them in their last years, visiting, bringing groceries, sitting with them when no one else did. That is why she was chosen. I looked at them, tears threatening. I hadn't asked them to be here. They had chosen to come, to speak, to bear witness. My parents' lawyer scrambled, objecting, claiming their words were irrelevant testimony. But the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Her eyes were sharp, measuring everything. For the first time, my parents' calm veneer cracked. My father's jaw clenched tighter, his knuckles white against the table. My mother's hands trembled, her tissue shredding between her fingers. When the session paused for recess, I stepped into the hallway, the weight of the moment sinking in. My aunt joined me, touching my shoulder. "You're not alone, Claire. You never were." I swallowed hard, my throat thick. I thought no one would believe me. "They do," she said. "They saw what your grandparents saw." Back in the courtroom, I sat taller. The fear that had gripped me was still there, but it was quieter now, overshadowed by something stronger: resolve. The witnesses had done more than defend me. They had broken the silence my parents counted on. For years, I had felt like no one saw the truth, like their version of me was all that existed. But in that room, others had spoken it aloud, shattering their control. As the hearing continued, I realized something. Whether the judge ruled in my favor or not, the tide had shifted. My parents weren't the only voices anymore. The witnesses were in the room, and they weren't leaving me to fight this battle alone. The judge's words still hung heavy in the room when silence rolled over us like a wave. My heart thudded so loudly that I swore the people sitting behind me could hear it. My palms were damp, my chest tight, and for one terrifying moment, I didn't even breathe. I had been waiting for this, dreading it and longing for it at the same time. The verdict was coming, and with it, the end of everything I thought I knew about my family. The judge leaned forward, his glasses slipping down his nose, his voice steady but firm. "The court recognizes the will presented, duly notarized and witnessed. The estate belongs, in entirety, to Claire Bennett." Gasps rippled across the room, as though a great wind had swept through the benches. I couldn't even process it at first. The words didn't feel real, like they had been spoken in another language. Then, slowly, they sank in. It was over. I had won. But the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. My father shot up from his chair, his fists pressed against the table. His face was a storm of disbelief and rage, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might break. "This is absurd," he barked, his voice echoing through the chamber. "This is manipulation, a fabrication. She tricked everyone." The judge raised a hand sharply. "Mr. Bennett, sit down. This court has reviewed the evidence thoroughly. The decision stands." But my father didn't sit. He turned toward me, his eyes blazing, and for a moment, I was a child again, small, frightened, desperate for approval that never came. His mouth twisted, and he spat out words that cut sharper than any blade. "You're no daughter of mine." A chill raced down my spine. The courtroom seemed to shrink around me, the air pressing in from every side. My stomach knotted, but I forced myself to hold his stare. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. His rejection burned, yes, but it also freed me. Beside him, my mother stayed seated. She didn't defend me, but she didn't join him either. Her hands trembled on her lap, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. She looked between us like a woman caught in a storm, torn but powerless. For years, she had chosen silence, and now, her silence was louder than ever. The bailiff stepped closer, sensing the tension, and finally, my father slumped back into his chair, muttering curses under his breath. The moment passed, but its weight remained. I gripped the edge of the table in front of me, grounding myself. My attorney leaned closer, whispering, "Claire, it's done. You stood your ground. This is your moment." But all I felt was exhaustion, bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. I thought winning would bring relief, but instead, I was left with the echo of my father's words, lodged like glass in my chest. The judge's gavel struck, finalizing the ruling. "This court is adjourned." The shuffle of feet, the scrape of benches, the low hum of conversations filled the space as people began to file out. Some glanced at me with curiosity, others with sympathy, but I tuned it all out. My focus was on the two figures across the room, my parents. As the crowd thinned, my father stormed out, refusing to look back. My mother lingered, her eyes flickering toward me once, twice, like she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She clutched her purse, turned, and followed him out the door. And just like that, I was left standing in the middle of the room, alone. Only, it wasn't the same kind of loneliness I had carried all these years. This was different. This was chosen. I exhaled slowly, my chest rising as if for the first time in years. My attorney touched my shoulder gently. "Claire, you okay?" I nodded, though my voice trembled. "I think I finally will be." The walk out of the courthouse felt surreal. Each step echoed in the hallway, as though marking the rhythm of a life I hadn't yet lived. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors, sunlight spilled across my face. It was sharp and bright, forcing me to squint, but I welcomed it. It felt like the world reminding me I was still here, still standing. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. Reporters hovered nearby, microphones at the ready, but I waved them off. This wasn't about headlines. This wasn't about wealth or property. This was about something deeper, choosing myself over the chains of a family that had never truly seen me. I walked down the courthouse steps slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight lift with each stride. At the bottom, I paused and glanced back once. The tall pillars loomed behind me, solid and unmoving, like the years I had spent trapped in silence and doubt. Then I turned forward again, choosing not to carry their shadow any longer. Later that evening, I stood in my grandmother's old garden, the papers still tucked neatly into my bag. The air smelled of earth and fading blossoms, and for the first time, the place felt entirely mine. Not because of the legal documents, not because of the ruling, but because I had finally claimed it with my own strength. I traced my fingers over the wooden railing of the porch, worn smooth by years of weather and touch. A memory rose of sitting here as a child, my grandmother's hand wrapped around mine, her voice gentle. "One day, Claire, you'll understand what it means to stand tall, even when the world leans against you." Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were release, gratitude, rebirth. She had believed in me before anyone else did, and now I had lived up to her faith. The choice wasn't about land, or money, or titles. It was about standing for myself, refusing to bend, even when it hurt. And that choice would stand long after the ink on those papers faded. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, I whispered into the quiet air, "I'm free." And for the first time in my life, I truly was.